This is part 15 of Angular 6 tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss creating and using a custom validator in an Angular reactive form. Angular provides several built-in validator functions like required, pattern, min-length, max-length, etc. Most of the time, our application validation requirements can be met using one or more of these built-in validator functions. However, sometimes we may need custom validation logic. For example, in an email field on our form, we only want to allow presumetech.com as the email domain. Any other email domain like Gmail or Yahoo is invalid. So for example, if I enter my email as venkat@gmail.com, it should display a validation error message. Email domain should be presumetech.com. This can be very easily achieved using a custom validator. So let's look at this in action. This is our create employee component class. Now, if you take a look at any of the built-in validators like required, for example, a validator, as you can see, is a function, and notice this required validator is taking in a parameter called control. This is the control that we want this validator function to validate. And if you look at the type of this parameter, it is abstract control. And if you recollect, both our form group and form control class inherit from the abstract control class. So specifying the base type here allows us to pass either a form group or a form control to validate. The next important bit is the return type of this method. Notice this method returns either null or validation errors object. If the form control passes validation, it returns null. If there are validation errors, it's going to return this validation errors object, which is a key value pair. Key, as you can see, is of type string and value can be anything. If we are building a custom validator, it has to adhere to the syntax. So let's make a copy of this and then change the bits that are required. Notice we are creating this function in our create employee component class file. Since this is a function, I'm going to use the function keyword. Let's name this function email domain. We have a red squiggly under abstract control, so let's import that. And we know validation errors is an object with a key value pair. Now, to keep it simple, instead of using this validation errors type, I'm actually going to use an object with a key value pair. Now we know key is of type string and value can be anything. Now the control that we want to validate is passed into this function as a parameter. Now let's retrieve the email from email form control using this control parameter. First, I'm going to create a constant. Let's call it email, and we know email is of type string, and this equals the control value. From the email, we need the domain name. For example, if I enter my email as venkat@gmail.com, then we want the domain name gmail.com. So let's create another constant for that. I'm going to name it domain. To retrieve the domain name, we want to retrieve the substring from email. So on the email string, let's use substring method, and to retrieve the substring, we need to specify the index from where we want to start. And remember, when we have an email like venkat@gmail.com, the domain name is starting from the @ symbol, but there could be multiple @ symbols in an email address. So we want the last index of that @ symbol. For that, on the email string again, let's use last index of method, and the index that we are looking for is the @ symbol index. And we don't want the @ symbol itself in the domain name, so we don't want to start at the index of @ symbol. So let's add 1 to that. So this is going to give us the email domain. Now all that is left to do is check if the domain name is presumetech.com. Let's convert the domain to a lowercase string so we can compare it with a lowercase string of presumetech.com. This makes our comparison case insensitive. So if the domain name is presumetech.com, then the control has passed validation. So let's return null to indicate that. If the domain is not presumetech.com, then the control has failed validation. To indicate that, we return an object with a key and a value. Remember, the key in the object is of type string, and this can be any string, but I'm going to set it to email domain. The value can be of any type, but I'm going to set a value of true to indicate that we have email domain validation error. So this completes creating our custom validator function. Our next step is to tie this validator function with the control that we want to validate. In addition to this required validator on our email form control, we also want to use our custom validator function email domain. Since we are using multiple validators, let's use array syntax and then specify our custom validator function email domain. Our final step is to include a validation message in the validation message structure that we have. So in addition to the required key on the email form control, we also want a validation error message for email domain key. And the validation error message is this: email domain should be pragimtech.com. Notice when we touch the email form control and leave it, we see both errors, required error and our custom validator error. By the way, we misspelled Pragimtech. We'll fix that in just a bit. But the point here is our custom validator should not be responsible for checking required errors. It's the job of the Angular's built-in required validator function. So within our custom validator function, let's check if the email is an empty string. If that's the case, let's return null to indicate that there is no validation error, so we don't see this validation message when the email form control is empty. First, let's fix this typo. In our validator function, in addition to checking if the domain name is pragimtech.com, we also want to check if email is an empty string. Notice now when the email form control is empty, we only see the required error. Now when I type an email address with a domain other than pragimtech.com, we have our custom validation error. If I change the domain name to pragimtech.com, the validation error disappears. So there are 3 simple steps to use a custom validator in your Angular application. First, create the custom validator function itself. Next, attach the custom validator to the form control that you want to validate. Finally, display the validation error. To show or hide the validation error message, check for email domain key on the errors collection of your email form control, because email domain is the key that our custom validator function returns if there is a validation error. That's it in this video. Thank you for watching and have a great day.